We have Sarah Anderson with us today. Sarah is going to talk about her experience of support during the pandemic. She's someone who directs her own support with an SDS budget, although as we'll hear this wasn't always the case. She's also a social work student and works as a community broker, so she's got a really unique perspective across the piece. She helps people access their own support. Sarah's pre-recorded her presentation and she'll join us at the end to answer any questions you've got. So please feel free again to put any comments you want in the chat and I'll put them to Sarah at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sarah Anderson. I live in South Ayrshire and have been using self-directed support for a couple of years now to meet both my personal and social care needs. I'm a social work student where I'm currently on my first placement and I'm a community broker. I was asked to give this presentation to give an insight of self-directed support as I have the 3 different perspectives, so hopefully it will be helpful as part of our discussion and work today. I've got various health needs and disabilities, including physical, mental and learning. Prior to using self-directed support, I was receiving care from an agency, which, although they had fantastic carers, was not working for myself. I had no choice and control in who provided my care or when it took place. As a university student, I was often having to leave class early to get showered, as this was when the carers were available. Although I had amazing lecturers and classmates, I was able to catch up with missed work. It had a detrimental impact on my self-esteem and identity. I had a real conflict between being a student and being someone who was cared for. I also had conflict as a vulnerable person during COVID, as I was unable to control who was entering my house. And unfortunately, this meant being cared for by people who chosen not to be vaccinated, so I was being put at risk in order to receive care. I also wasn't having any of my social needs met. As someone who's always been involved in my local community where I could actively volunteer, my life consisted of being behind a computer screen or inside my living room. I had to rely on family members to even take me out for a drive to get a bit of a change of scenery, and my mental health was significantly declining, which had an impact on my physical health. This might not sound too bad, but the reality was my life was getting out of bed, staying in my nightwear until about 10 o'clock in the morning, having a shower, and sitting until it was time to be put to bed. Bedtime very often being around 7 o'clock at night, as again, this was when the agency carers were available. I was incredibly thankful for the support I was receiving, but it was certainly not living a fulfilling life, and almost none of my personal outcomes were being met. I began to study social work during this time, and although I had heard of self-directed support, I didn't know what it was other than this magical concept where people had choice over their care and increased control over their life. We didn't receive teaching on self-directed support until 3rd year, and although we certainly knew about 17th century workhouses, we didn't know legislation which can protect vulnerable people, which at that time I did consider myself part of. I was vulnerable because my care was being done to me. I wasn't involved in decisions. I did know how to complain, but when I said that things weren't working, I was told there was very limited choice, if choice even then existed. Choice and control was not what I was experiencing with my own care. So when I attended a discussion on self-directed support run by the Scottish Association of Social Workers for social work students and newly qualified social workers, my life was significantly changed. The discussion which was happening was the ideals behind self-directed support and what it should look like in practice. It was great to know that new social workers would know the principles of self-directed support. However, I spoke out and said that my care was not the picture being given, far from it. And enter a certain amazing person who some of you will no doubt know, Anne-Marie Monaghan. Anne-Marie took the time to talk with me and explain that what I was experiencing didn't have to be the only way. She gave me hope, which I had lost a long time ago, that my life could look differently, and she gave me drive which I had lacked to make changes. From that conversation, I spoke with Community Brokerage Network and met my broker, Carol, who empowered me to ask for changes I needed to get my life back and have change happen. I currently use option 1, and my life has changed beyond recognition. I employ 3 personal assistants who help me with my personal and social care needs, and they've all been amazing. I said to Anne-Marie during the meeting where I felt that my head had done a complete spin. I was used to being objectified with zero choice, to being an employer of people whose role was decided with what task I needed and wanted, and I was given a choice in which I wanted to live. Not simply exist, but really live. I'd gone from being so far down the power ladder to actually taking back power and control. It was definitely a very strange feeling because although I hated it, I had got used to feeling less than human, less than a person, less than myself. It definitely took some time to get used to. Through self-directed support, I was able to be part of my community again. I've been able to get back to the cinema, which is a real passion of mine, and only last weekend I attended a music festival for the full weekend, which quite some difference from sitting at home alone and having zero quality of life. I was incredibly fortunate to meet my PAs because there's such a lack of carers and PAs that even though self-directed support is simply wonderful, it just doesn't align to the values if there's no people to employ. So one of the most important parts of my own recovery and living my life to the full was the opportunity granted to me to become a broker in my own right. My own broker, Carol, approached me to ask if I would consider the role, and my first thought was that I didn't have the experience, qualification, or understanding to help others. As a social work student with my own social worker and over 20 years of lived experience as a disabled person, to think I was not able to help others, I think goes back to how powerless I felt prior to receiving self-directed support. It highlights how important people with lived experience are and should be in all decisions about care, including changes to self-directed support and other legislation, including the National Care Review. As a broker, I've been incredibly privileged to be able to help others make decisions about their own care. However, the role is incredibly difficult. I mentioned the lack of carers and personal assistants earlier. However, it's such a crisis, I don't think it's been reported enough, and people don't have the choices available, and it's really heartbreaking to see. I recently worked with a family who have requested care several weeks prior to Christmas. The care was agreed, however it's not been implemented because carers simply don't exist. The family are now making the really tough choice to place their dad in 28-day respite residential care because looking after him is causing real issues in their own personal, physical and mental health. Even after those 28 days, they've no guarantee that care will be available. Respite care isn't even available for everybody, so thankfully they've got a social worker who's fighting for them to receive adequate and suitable support. Something needs to improve because it's simply not acceptable that we're causing harm to people simply due to their lack of choice, a real principle of self-directed support. So I was asked to give my views on the improvement plan. I'm intending to do these sections set out as part of the consultation, but before I do, I want to fully back Self-Directed Support Scotland's views on the lack of meaningful contribution to the consultation people with lived experience were able to provide. Continuously during consultations like these, people with lived experience are admitted, including not have consultations and formats to allow their input and not having the time and support granted to make the timetables. This simply isn't acceptable. The expression "nothing for us without us" comes to mind. How can changes be made by something that disabled people want if they're not able to input into consultations? I'd also agree with the fact that accountability is a major concern. Too many times have people with lived experience given their views and wishes for no change to happen, either because plans are shelved or other areas take priority, or because there's no central person or team responsible for the changes. Across Scotland, there's huge differences with how self-directed support runs. It's often as a result of leadership vision, and sadly too many leaders are still under the perception that disabled people are somehow unable to make choices about their own care, and therefore self-directed support is seen out of the service user's ability. There's some councils where self-directed support works amazingly, as leaders respect the autonomy and experience which disabled people have in their own lives, plus they're willing to work creatively to best support not only their colleagues, but their service users. As a broker, I have to say that even though the three Ayrshires are so close together geographically, the mindset from leaders is so incredibly different. It leads to a postcode lottery and outcomes for people. Collaboration across organisations, not limited to local authorities, is vital, with individuals at the heart of all discussions and decisions. Leeds would potentially be able to promote this type of working with the aim to prevent and remove service blockages, including lack of carers, so people truly have the choice, including staying at home. It's vital that commissioning be co-produced by service users. In my local area, for example, people are crying out for learning support related day centres. However, if these services are not being commissioned, they're having to rely on support options which are simply not suitable or wished for. Adhering to best practices is such an incredibly important area. Too often I've heard people say that social workers only work with option 3. Training and support for social workers may very likely be necessary. However, for people to be blocked from the best options which they wish due to resources or understanding isn't good enough. Similarly, for social workers to force people to use option 1 to reduce caseload isn't good enough and completely removes choice and control. Co-production must be at the heart of all planning and input. Service users' views are often seen as a separate exercise, if they're even asked for at all, which leads to brokerage support being so incredibly vital. The social co-production between the broker, social worker and the individual to ensure the budget is as impactful and effective as possible. As a broker and student social worker, it can be incredibly difficult to ensure social workers recognise that we aren't trying to criticise their work. Rather, by co-producing, brokers have the potential to reduce social work caseload while promoting the rights of individuals. Having spoken with many social workers, there needs to be challenges to social workers not being able to work creatively, whether it be having more budgets allocated, and particularly in rural areas where I live, resources can be difficult to ensure, or by social workers' professional judgments being overruled by managers who have got no relationship with the individual. Far too often social workers work hard to produce amazing care plans, simply for them to be thrown out or reduced by managers. It clearly impacts on the individuals and the morale of social workers. We understand that budgets are stretched across the country, however care provision must not be a casualty of this. We understand also that budgets are tight, however I've personally experienced social workers stating to myself that if I was to receive support, then another individual would go without. We shouldn't be setting individuals who require support against each other, and absolutely should not be stating this to the individual. However, we should be ensuring that all assessments are based on rights-based outcome principles and not simply removing deficits. With personal experience, it's clear that the sooner the support is implemented, the best the potential outcome. With good support, it didn't take me long to recognise that all I could ask for from life was not simply a daily shower, but rather a life with aims, purpose and worth. As previously mentioned, even though I'm currently on practice, I've had very limited education and self-directed support. And frankly, I don't think I would have understood the importance if I wasn't a service user and actively involved with student groups. I've got classmates who are in placement currently where they've been told as part of their development that they only deal with option 3 Hence, not knowing otherwise, they're in danger of going into their careers believing that this is the only choice. It's simply not acceptable for this to be the case, and I would urge programme leaders to include at the very least the importance of self-directed support from a lived experience perspective. I know from lived experience how vital brokerage is to enhancing care and quality of life. I believe there must be more discussion and understanding from social workers on the importance of the role of brokerage so that it will remove their defences and create partnerships to benefit the individual service users. Assessments can be incredibly worrying and distressing. Social work and brokerage working in collaboration can lessen the fear for the individual involved and focus on their outcomes rather than simply removing deficits with a rights-based perspective. Telecare and telehealth can be incredibly beneficial. It promotes independent living, and it should be urged that individuals who wish to access this have their options explored and enhanced. Independent support can be vital to ensure good standards of care and to ensure self-directed support is as far-reaching as possible. For myself, advocacy is vitally important, both within brokerage and as an addition. The support that advocacy allowed me was to exercise my own rights when things were happening in my support which were not appropriate or to high enough standard. Independent support can also assist individuals where they've not been granted a budget to access local services or challenge decisions. It's so important that people employing PAs have somewhere to turn if things go wrong, or simply to ask questions prior to anything negative occurring. Being an employer can be incredibly daunting, and for many this alone turns them off certain routes and options, hence limiting their choices. Having help and guidance, I strongly believe, would enhance choice, as it could remove some of those fears from the individuals. Having spoken with my own PAs, who I've got a fantastic working relationship with, it's clear that there are issues not only in retention but in recruitment. PAs are clearly being underpaid, and with the amount of tasks which they're expected to carry out, there must be different pay and promotion structures in place. Support for PAs to ask questions or raise concerns is also vital, hence a training framework and pay uplifts is much needed. I'd really like to thank you all for being here and listening to my views and concerns. I strongly believe that self-directed support can be life-changing. It certainly has been for myself, but there must be appropriate care and support. I'm also looking forward to hearing further today about future developments, which are not only person-centred, human rights focused, but ambitious. It's what we deserve. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah. Morning.
Hi.
Hi there. Thanks
Hi,
for
Sarah.
that. Your presentation was fascinating and really quite inspirational. I've got a couple of quotes that I'd like to read to you that were put in the chat during that. Tressa Burke put that Sarah's life experience as described, no purpose, meaning or hope, pre-SDS, is so familiar and resonates with thousands of disabled people and members of Glasgow Disability Alliance. Social care and particularly SDS can be utterly transformational, and it's great to be reminded of this. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. We're privileged and humbled to hear from you, and we're reminded of the importance of connections and peer support. And James McClay has said, thank you for sharing this, Sarah. Hearing the effect on people's lives when we don't get SDS right is so powerful. Sarah, some of the questions that came in, you spoke about your experience of support during the pandemic, about having people in your house that you didn't want. And we've touched on regulation of PAs today. What are your thoughts on that? People are asking.
I think it's a tough one because I think if we're regulating PAs then we're potentially removing choice. However, I'm sorry, I'm hearing a really bad echo. I don't know if other people are,
Okay,
so
we can't hear
apologies
it.
if you are. Good. So I I'm concerned more about the fact that people don't know where to complain and how to complain, and if they do complain, that their choice is removed from them. Where I live, I was told that if I was to make a formal complaint over having that instance, that my care would be removed because there is no alternative. Not only is there an alternative and there's no other agency available, but there's no other worker in the agency available. So I'm more concerned about people having the strength and support to make complaints rather than actual regulations, which I think potentially can actually put up barriers that may not be needed.
Thanks, Sarah. That's a really important point. Bex, you had a question as well?
Sarah, I found your presentation really, really interesting, and how you wove together the different experiences that you've had in your life. Something that I'd like to find out from you is if you had to think of one or maybe two things that made a real difference to you in that process to becoming a PA employer, to taking back that control, what would that one or two things be, or what would those one or two things be that made the real difference if you're in your heart?
I'm really sad that she's not here today, because I would say Anne-Marie Monaghan. So when I attended the event, which I mentioned for the newly qualified and social work student, I had requested that we discuss self-directed support because I wanted to know more about it. And I was being told it's this amazing thing where choice, control, freedom, flexibility, etc. Is given to individuals like myself. And I was sitting here going, my bedtime's at 6 o'clock and I've been out of bed since 10 o'clock to have a shower. Where's my choice? That's not the reality that people are facing. And my the scene out of The Exorcist where like the person's head like swivels, that happened to me. I was like, I completely blown away that this was a potential. It took quite a significant amount of time for the reality to actually happen. I spoke with my broker, who I think actually saw her in the chat earlier, Carol, who was amazing. But Carol had a real battle with my own social worker. My social worker wouldn't listen to Carol, and I didn't have the courage or ability at that point to actually speak and advocate for myself. So that's a huge barrier. When we had things put in place, it was also a bit of a barrier in how do I become an employer, because it's such a different outlook on receiving care. It's almost as if you're going from an object where things happen to you to you're now actually exercising your own freedom, choice, control, all of the buzzwords around self-directed support. But it was such an amazing process. The support that I was given was honestly absolutely phenomenal from brokerage, which I really would encourage brokerage to be at heart and centre, just alongside individuals being at heart and centre. I want to not quite answer this question, but I want to raise something that you mentioned earlier about people being scared, and that's why they take part in exercises like this. I had my assessment carried out just 2 days ago. When my social worker came to the house, I was terrified. I'm a social work student myself. I've been receiving care for numerous years now. I was terrified when they came to the house. I think that highlights actually how daunting the whole process is and why things need to change and improve.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, weaving together that importance of those relationships with we've disappeared. Weaving together the relationships with people and having somebody alongside you that you know and trust. And you've mentioned a couple of people there, and not to underestimate how scary it can be when we have to lay open our lives to other people who might determine and make decisions about us that affect our ability to have that choice and control and to be independent
Absolutely.
human beings. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Sarah, for joining us this morning. It was really valuable. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Fantastic.